Good evening and welcome to another live stream. I'm here in our new film studio. I'm on my own tonight, which is a little different to sort of what we're used to. And we're going to talk through a few bits about engine blocks. So if you are watching or tuning in, or you have just tuned in, get a comment in the box below and I'll do my best to sort of answer our questions live on air tonight. I'm joined here with this lovely M54 block. Sorry, Ben's just grinning at me over there. I said I was on my own, but he's staying out of the way tonight. We've got a new audio set up, so please let us know how that is as well, because as with all technology, it can come and it can go, and we're always trying new things to hopefully bring a slightly better a better experience to people that are sat at home watching. So as I was saying, we're joined here by a lovely M54 block, which is of course a BMW straight six. Now we're going to go pretty simple on tonight's live stream. So if you are watching and you haven't really got any idea, this is the one to watch. There's not going to be much jargon. We're going to go through it and actually explain what each part of the engine is, and sort of build up your knowledge to hopefully give you a bit more understanding when you do go to a machine shop and they tell you some things or what's wrong with your engine. You'll hopefully have a better understanding. We've got Steve Empson watching. Steve's quite a regular to sort of tune in and watch our streams. We built an M50 B25 turbo for him earlier in the year, and I'm hoping he's getting on quite well. I haven't actually heard from you for a while, Steve. Hope all's well down on the sunny coast, and the build's going well. I know we had some photos of your exhaust manifold, and that was looking absolutely mega. So anyway, where were we? So yeah, we've got this M54 block. So we're going to start off. It's BMW, of course. Most of the streams are going to be BMW sort of related. And the first thing you're going to notice is, of course, it is a straight six. So you might not be able to see it there. We've got cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now these are an 84mm bore. So this is an M54 B30. So let's break down that code so that you actually know what it means. So BMW, generally speaking, most engines do begin with an M, and then there's sort of the performance range. So you've got M54, S54. Those numbers don't always work sort of in line with each other, but as a rule of thumb, you've got the M54. The racier version is the S54. Older stuff, you've got the M50 cast iron used in sort of E36, and then you've got the S50, which is of course the E36 M3 engine. So as I say, it's not a rule of thumb, but generally speaking, that's sort of how they do it. Moving on to the second, so in the middle you've got a B, so that stands for benzene, so it's a petrol engine. So it's a M54, so your engine code, B, so it's a petrol, and then the last number, of course, is your capacity, so 25, taking this to be a 2.5 litre. Now, what moved on quite a lot when BMW brought out the M54 is, of course, the block material. A lot of blocks prior to this, especially in the straight six range, were, of course, cast iron. BMW strayed away from that with the M54 to make it aluminium. It's still got a cast iron bore, so it's got sleeves fitted from standard, but we'll talk for a little bit more in a moment about what that actually means. The first thing you notice when you do pick up one of these blocks is, of course, the weight difference compared to its sort of cast iron counterpart. I haven't got an exact figure, but these are a lot lighter, to the point where, I can pick that up. I wouldn't be doing that if that was a say an S54 or an S50 block, or even an M50. They're far heavier. So let's move on and actually talk about some characteristics of the M54. As we mentioned, obviously we know what the block material is, and if we rotate it onto its side, there we can see, obviously, here are our cylinder bores as well. So let's start with a few little keywords that the machine shop are likely to use, and let's stray away from the fact this is an M54 and just generically talk about it as if it were an engine block. So the overall thing, this is an engine block. It's the heart of the engine. It's the middle, it's where all the magic happens. Obviously the head's got a lot going on, but in terms of where the rest of your components sort of live, they live in this. This is the life and soul of the party, should we say. So what we've got is obviously straight six. These are cylinder bores, so the bores. Obviously, if the engine's in line, they're all going to be in a line. Should it be a V capacity, they're obviously going to be opposed in varying different angles, dependent on the design of the engine. What we notice up here, so this is called our deck. So it might be that you take a block into a machine shop and that they say that there's a bit of distortion in the deck face and the block actually needs refacing. So what that would mean is this will get clocked up on a machine, nice and flat, and then it'll be refaced to take out that distortion. Where BMW run quite a tight cylinder spacing, the amount of material between the bores is actually quite minimal. A little bit more on these, but if we move over to CNS 54, you've got a 91mm bore spacing on a 87mm bore, so you've only actually got 4mm of material between, say, cylinder 1 and cylinder 2, meaning that head gasket problems can be an issue. What we'll also notice on the deck face is we've got lots of little holes, varying in their sort of uses, in all honesty. So if we actually have a look around here, you'll notice there's a couple of dowels poking out. So this is where our cylinder head's going to bolt onto, and we've actually got varying, hole there, and these are threaded. So OE head bolt would bolt into them and torque down the head. We've also got these little oblong holes. Now this is where coolant passes from the block to the head to just aid engine cooling. So the cooling system will be pumping the coolant around the engine, up through these passageways around the head to try and get as much heat away from all the components, especially at higher operating temperatures. And that, we also got a couple of oil drains. So where BMWs sit on a slant, you'll generally find on the left-hand side of the engine, on the exhaust side, there will be a couple of drains. This is to aid the oil from the cylinder head just sort of drain down into the sump. If we move up onto the other side, so we now got the block sitting on its deck face. It's pretty important if you are moving engines around, especially on if you're doing this in your garage floor at home, you don't want to put it down on this face and then end up dragging it along, because the smallest bit of gravel gets caught in between the floor and that deck face and can end up putting a score in it. And obviously you don't want to take a huge amount of material off when you do reface it. And if you've got a ½ mil deep score running straight across where the head gasket firing is going to go, it's going to cause you mighty issues. Moving on to the bottom of the block. So we're now on the bottom end. Now, what we have here is, so this is an M54, as we mentioned. It's actually aluminium block material on the top half of the bearing housing, and on the bottom half is actually an iron main cap. So different materials, which is quite interesting. And what we actually have is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of these, and that is because it's seven main bearing crank. So lots of support for each cylinder. On older stuff, you might only have, say, 3 mains, or on a 4-cylinder, on reload stuff, you might actually only have a main bearing on one end and a main bearing on the other end. But most modern engines have generally got a main bearing in between each conrod, in between each cylinder, to try and aid rigidity within the crankshaft. What we've also got down the bottom, which you're going to struggle to see on the camera here, on the high performance BMW stuff, they varied their design, but you've got a couple of little hole there and a bolt there. So what would actually bolt into there would be your oil piston squirter. So that's running off the main oil gallery line on the block, and then that's going to be squirting oil straight up onto the bottom of the pistons to aid cooling, and to actually benefit lubrication on those cylinder bore walls. What we're also noticing, which is a bit different, and mainly because this is an aluminium engine block, these aren't present on, say, an M50 or an S54 or an S50, is these actual webs here. So because it's an aluminium block, it's a little bit more prone to sort of stresses and strains, and there's not quite as rigid, and there's a fair amount of flexibility in the block itself. So what BMW did was to try and aid sort of crankshaft rigidity and main bearing line rigidity, was to put in these little metal plates, and they actually tie in the main cap with the edge of the block, and that makes a big difference on a design like this. We don't have a crankshaft here, but obviously what we've got, if we turn the block to its end position, so you can't quite see it overly well, you've got a hole there. So this is the main bearing line. So when you take a block into a machine shop, they may end up actually saying, that the main line is oversized, undersized, or it's no longer round. This can be caused by the wrong fasteners being fitted into the main cap, aftermarket fasteners, or stud kits being fitted as well. It's a fairly extensive machining process where you would actually take each individual main cap off, which we should be able to do on one of these. Nope. Let's take this one off, for instance. Here's one I prepared earlier. A bit of a fiddle with those reinforcement plates. Obviously, on a lot of the newer stuff, the aluminium block stuff, rather than having a main cap, they actually incorporated the sort of a cradle on the bottom. So the block sort of splits in half as opposed to having individual main caps. Although, for instance, on, say, the B58, which is the engine is in R140, they went back to sort of an individual main cap design. Right, so back to sort of mainline alignment. Should you need to get your mainline machined, what you'd actually end up doing was, you know, very precisely clocking this up in a machine and surface grinding a small amount of material off this cap. You'd then, with either new stretch fasteners or an aftermarket stud kit, end up putting the cap back on the engine, like so. And now that it's actually been machined, once that is all clamped down, we've no longer got a round mainline bore. We've actually got, you know, it's dropped a bit, which allows us to then machine out the bottom and the top, take a little bit of material out, and hopefully get that housing back around like it was designed and back to the specification that BMW or the manufacturer designed it to be. As I say, that's pretty involved work, and if you're using OE replacement stretch bolts, you shouldn't really see much of an issue with that. But it's definitely worth checking. So if you are doing an engine build, you'd want to, you know, check that all those housings, torque them down. If it's a torque and angle, bolt them all up, get a bore gauge, measure it all properly, make sure they're round and within spec, and then you'd actually put your bearings in as well and measure the bore size, and that's the correct way of measuring sort of bearing clearance, as it were. Get that bolted up a little bit tighter. Now, up the front of the engine, back to underneath. Sorry, I forgot about this. Up the front on the BMWs is generally where they run their oil pump, and we'll notice we've got a dowel here, and also these sort of holes here, and that is where the oil pump bolts on. So these are chain drive, so they're a duplex chain running up to the overhead cams, and then they've actually got a simplex chain just down to the oil pump, which sits underneath. These don't actually run an oil pump tensioner, unlike, you know, most of the performance BMWs. We do a lot of modifications to end up fitting tensioners to stuff, because the chain whip can end up causing a little bit of damage to the pump or other issues. If we move to the front of the block, obviously we were just mentioning sort of chain tensioners and whatnot, but this is where these pins up on the front of the block, this is where the chain guides would actually sit. Sitting on the front of the block, we would have a cover. Now, this cover obviously stops all, it's an oil-fed chain, stops all that oil obviously exiting the engine. So it is a cover and stops foreign particles getting in as well, because as soon as grit gets into any sort of chain drive, it's obviously going to exacerbate wear. What we have got is one thing to make note. If you do get your block decked, or you get the deck face refaced, is of course the machine shop might not ask you, and it's very important that you know this, that you supply them with the front cover as well, because they are a matched pair. So if you've got a freshly machined block and then you haven't had the front cover on, and you put the front cover on, it will obviously sit proud by however much you've had refaced off, which, especially on like modern MLS, quite thin head gaskets, would cause an issue, and, you know, would cause premature head gasket failure, or even minor just oil leakage down from the front cover, which is of course not what you want. Now, that's a fair few of the characteristics of the M54. If we actually look along the casting on the side, we will notice, had I put it the other way around, of course. 1 second. not going to be overly clear to see, but we have actually got a casting along here. It's a slight rib, a bit like a tube on the side of the actual engine, and that fundamentally, that is what it is. So that's the main oil gallery line. So we've actually got on these, because they're aluminium, they're a threaded bung on either end. On a lot of the cast iron stuff, you've got an interference fit press bung that's then pushed into a step on the block, which is actually kept in place in the front by the front cover, so it can't come out. Not that it should, because as I said, it's an interference fit. So what we've got in there is our main oil gallery. It's very important, if you are rebuilding one of these engines, to either unscrew those bungs or remove the bungs and fully clean in that gallery line, because that's where any foreign debris can get stuck in there. You can spend all your time and all your money putting a nice engine together. If you haven't cleaned that gallery line, it's very risky, and you could end up passing some rather nasty objects through the fresh engine. This has only got one main line, but a lot of the S50s, S54s have got two feeds, one on either side. So that's quite interesting. This is going to be quite a cool build, actually. It's for a race car, so it's a 330, where he's just wants a bit of reliability. So it's just in with us for a refresh. So we've measured all the bores, we'll measure the main line, check that everything's within spec, replace some parts, and then give the head an overhaul and put it back together. Of course, if you are watching and you have got any comments, please just stick them in the comments box, and I'll do my best to answer them. It's quite amazing, actually, when you're the only one behind the camera, how much talking you do. If anyone knows me, I'm not much of a talker. I spend most of my days hidden in the machine shop, behind a machine, generally working on some sort of head, or boring a block, or carrying out all sorts of machining, or checking on the guys, seeing how the engine builds are progressing. So that's what obviously makes us a little bit different from most other places, is we can carry out all the machining. We can then actually build the engine in our nice clean room, and then engine comes out of the clean room and goes into the workshop where we actually install it as well. So a little bit different to any other BMW specialists that are out there. And of course, if you do have any questions, pop them in an email as well, and we'll do our best, if we're not in a live stream, to answer them. Or if you do want to get any work booked in, likewise, give us a little call and we'll happily advise you over the phone. That's about all I've got to say for tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you next time. As I say, we're sort of going to start doing a few more live streams from time to time, whether it'll be myself or Ben or us together, maybe introducing new products, talking through maybe a new process that we use or have discovered, or maybe it's something a little bit silly as well, like one of the project cars that we've got going at the moment. Head over to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and obviously look at our other videos. We've got the 140 now, so there's plenty of new content coming about Big Power 1 series. So we'll catch you later, and thanks for watching. Now's the awkward bit where I walk over to the camera.